Boom. So, as you guys see on the screen tonight, we have a couple things. This is really, we're going to be talking about what an off season looks like. So for many of you guys, you're going through a full off season right now. You're preparing yourselves for, a 2-month or 3-month build, 4-month build to season. Many of you guys are coming out of fall right now, questioning, do I take some time off? Do I deload? Do I build up a little bit more here? Do I focus on maybe a velocity phase and do a velocity phase? There's so much that goes into it, but the first thing that we have to do before we start diving into workloads and planning a velo phase and all this, we have to really start to think about the long term. What's our goal? And so we kind of start back from the top. So what you're going to see here is basically a cycle. And this is to get us into season. This starts us from the beginning of an off season, takes us all the way into a season. And so what we're doing here is, number one, you're going to see our first focus with you from a throwing standpoint at KP is going to be our movement. And so what we want to do, we look at the load that you're going to be under during this period of time, right? So let's say you take a couple of weeks off. We're talking about kind of a pro off season here. Let's say you take a couple of weeks off and you're now building back up. You're getting ready for what's ahead. We want to really focus heavy on movement quality. So that means, number one, in that first month, we're going to start building mobility, stability, and strength. We want to evaluate those things. We want to assess those things. It's time to put our body, if there's anything that's coming out of a season that may not be healthy, we want to fix that right out of the jump before we start our off season. Make sure that we're going into the back half of our off season healthy, prepared for what's ahead. So a lot of times, especially with our pro guys, this is that area where we look at, we say, okay, mobility, stability, and strength, where are you lacking? How do we assess you? Let's get you physically right in that first month. This also comes down to our pitching biomechanics. So, we want to assess you. This is, again, part of that assessment process is our biomechanics component. We use ProPlay AI at our facility to evaluate our athletes, which means that we can do one of two things. One, we can take video that you had from in season, and we can evaluate exactly how you were moving at your peak in season. So if you can get open side video, slow motion in season, that gives us such good insight as to where to start with making adjustments or even, trying to establish where you were at your best in season. And so we start to kind of lay out a plan based upon those biomechanics. But let's say you don't get a chance to get that open side video in season, no big deal. This is where we encourage an exit pin. So the exit pin from the season will be, you finish your season, you come in and you finish your season. Basically, you stay hot throwing wise. You come to KP, you throw one bullpen, and then we shut you down. That one bullpen will be kind of your baseline in preparation for what's ahead for the season or for the off season. So we'll use that open side video that we take at that time as your biomechanics reference point to try to get you to either change some things or maybe just try to get back to that place that you were. So we use that for our pitching biomechanics. And then from there, we establish, like it says here, our specific drills in preparation of movement. So we're just trying to create a really good movement base. So we have the macro cycle, which is like it could be the entire off season, or it could be an entire year's plan. It's a long-term plan, right? Then we have the micro cycles, which are kind of these inner working small pieces of this plan. So in this case, our first micro cycle here, we're talking about movement. We're talking about movement quality. We want to focus, put a precedent. We're building up, so we're focusing in on the movement quality of this point. But then once we move in past that, so that's usually about the first month. After that, we're looking at output. And then we start to the output is not like a velo phase. The output is we're starting to gain intensity. We're starting to build intensity. This is like 70% to 100% intensity. We're starting to really elevate twice a week your one-day workload values, and starting to really try to gain an understanding of how our body's moving at its highest speed. So we try to build that piece, try to take what we've learned from movement quality, try to replicate that now, bring that to our overall output. So we want to see what we do in that first month really impact and affect that second month. So where we can do some baselines. If we want to do some plyo velos or we want to do some mound velos, it's okay. But it's not quite the run and gun format or heavy velocity phase. It's just falling underneath that still progressing workload at that time. This is a focus of, again, long toss, plyo velo, pin velo, kind of the main components there. After that, we're talking about a month 3 or a phase 3, again, a micro cycle phase 3, we're talking about pitch design. So this would be where we start to really look into our ball flight data. We start to really look into high-speed video from our Chronos camera. We start to look at pitch profiling and start to try to evaluate, how do you stack up? What are some things we can do with your pitches? So we've gone through movement now. We've looked at your mechanics. We've looked at the movement qualities that make you what you are. We've built up that intensity around that movement. Now it starts to kind of lean to compete with that movement. So we're now getting into ball flight data. We're looking at some high-speed video, like I said, that pitch profiling, understanding how your stuff works. And we're starting to look ahead to now where the competition component of this is, which is we're going to compete. That's our fourth microcycle and our last before season. So we're going to push players into looking at pin metrics. How well did you command the baseball today? That's one thing that often gets really overlooked in this, right? We don't take into account the measures that we're going to have to undersee in season. We also want to now see in this competition phase. So we can do live at bats or in some cases, we just jump right into that early inter-squad seasonal play. This is where we really want to still measure things and kind of move up from our pitch design. How's my stuff actually profiling against hitters? This is my first time to really see that. You might go through a pitch design cycle and realize that that pitch just isn't for you against hitters. It profiles great, but it maybe just isn't the right pitch. So this is where you start to figure that out in that competition phase. And we go from there. So let's break this down even just a touch further. We're going to kind of get into, again, how we build this out, maybe what technologies we're going to use with this as well. So again, output, our focus is with long toss, plyo velo, and pin velo. Again, our focus here is just to try to up the intent. And so you see that word here right in the second line there. It's high volume, or it's volume of high intent throwing. So we're trying to accumulate that slowly and appropriately. And so one of the things I really want to point out here in this phase is that we use long toss, but we can use long toss in two different ways if we wanted to, right? We look at long toss as moving back using the distance as an external factor to drive intensity. Or if you're not somebody who likes to long toss, so we don't mind you throwing shorter, we want to up the output, meaning that we're going to use a radar gun and we're going to use some more objective measure to start to kind of evaluate how you create output. So that is our output phase. Let's move on to, again, next one here. We're going to go, sorry, movement phase should have been first. But we're going to use, this is what I really like to see about the movement phase. I want to just address some technologies here that we use here. So for our assessment component, we have our range of motion screen with the Modus ROM MX. We have our VBT. In biomechanics, we have ProPlay AI and slow motion video. And in drill work, we have our KP app, which is coming out. But as many of you guys know, that's in facility, us passing that along in reports. So for those of you that are not part of KP, those of you that are part of KP, some of the big pieces that I want you guys to take out of this is just to understand we have to measure these components. We have to manage these. What gets measured gets mastered. We want to be able to go through this and evaluate, am I getting better, right? So if I assess in month one, looking to next year, going into an off season, what does that assessment look like again in that month one? What does month one and month two look like in terms of assessment comparative? Those are things that we want to jump into. Pitch design, same thing here. We have, in our case, we have our TrackMan. We have Baseball Savant that we'll lean on for a lot of data. We have Chronos for our camera. And again, we'll look at the KP app for pitch profiling, understanding where you best fit. And then lastly here, as we go into the competition phase, again, same thing. We'll use TrackMan for the seasonal play. Use Baseball Savant TrackMan for player in-pin metrics. Then live at bat, same thing, slow motion camera with ProPlay AI. And we'll use TrackMan as well for that on the field. So hopefully this brings some clarity to you guys around what it is that we are trying to accomplish in terms of macro cycles, meaning the long term, like it could be an entire off season, versus the micro cycles, which would be providing the singular point of focus for a single phase in the off season. So for some of you guys that are looking to that, obviously, guys at KP, I want you guys to look at and address those components of your off season accordingly. As you guys move into the movement phase, which many of you are starting, in the next couple weeks, really have a baseline of focus. Talk to our staff and make sure you understand what it is exactly that you're focused on in the first couple weeks of your movement phase, and let's build it from there. Let's have a great off season in doing that.